If you listened to last week's episode with Dr. Brett Genzel-Derman about music and psychotherapy, and you enjoyed it, you're going to love this conversation. Today, my guests are Jesi Sasaki and Shannon McHugh. Both are certified fitness trainers, certified nutrition specialists, and both are licensed psychologists. They are on a mission to educate children and parents on social emotional fitness through physical activity. They believe that approaching mental health through the lens of overall well-being will not only reduce the emotional and behavioral problems that are present in many children today, but will prevent mental health issues in the long run. I completely agree, and I can't wait for you to hear this conversation.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Doctors McHugh and Sasaki, welcome to the podcast.
Hi. Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
This is my first time having two people interviewed at the same time, so this should be fun.
It's okay. We have like the same brain anyways. We always tease each other that we're always thinking the same thoughts.
Wonderful.
We're just going to have to try not to talk over each other, but I think we'll be okay.
Yeah.
That just makes it more interesting, I think.
Yeah. The more the merrier.
You know? Absolutely. Absolutely. So you're both doing well?
Yep. We're very busy, which is good.
Good. Well, so I was really excited about you both coming on the podcast. Last week we had Dr. Brett Genzel-Derman, and she was on and she was talking about how she integrates art and music into therapy. And as I was thinking about these podcast episodes, I thought about the work that you both do. And I thought that this would be a great continuation of that conversation, which is really about changing the way we view traditional mental health. And I think that you both do that spectacularly well. And so I wanted to talk about your approach and tell us a little bit about you. I know I introduced you in the beginning, but talk about your approach because it really is innovative in the way that you do psychotherapy and integrate movement into the work that you do.
Sure. I was going to say, it's funny that you were talking to Dr. Brett Genzel because she was a supervisor of mine at my postdoc. So,
oh my goodness.
And I think she was actually one of the people that really did inspire me to kind of challenge the way that we were thinking about mental health. I worked with her on the Sonic Teens group that she was running over at Child and Family Guidance Center. And as somebody who used to be a musician, it was really interesting for me to see kind of how kids were opening up and doing that whole thing. And I think it did, as I left and started thinking about things that I wanted to do myself, I had always thought that there was a way for us to incorporate physical activity with kind of teaching kids emotional health, 101. And so it's always been something that was in the back of my mind that I wanted to do as somebody who was an athlete as well. So I had always found tremendous kind of support in the athletic community. And I think it gave me a lot of what helps me mentally. And so it's always been something that I wanted to kind of try to find a way to connect, but didn't know necessarily how. And then I met Jesi, Dr. Sasaki, while we were at a group practice that specialized in social skills groups. And there we ended up doing a social skills summer camp where we really saw the kids kind of open up because it was about working on social skills, but it was in the context of really fun physical activity things. And both of us, I think, during this experience realized that the kids really grew and learned so much more when they were actually moving their bodies and having a lot of fun together. And I think both of us realized that we were interested in that part of the mental health world, not so much in the social skills part, but in them moving their bodies and learning something together collaboratively. And so I think that's where we had a lunch date, and it was kind of just born, the idea that, I think people get stuck in the idea of mental health needs to be CBT or it needs to be this or that. And I think that there's a way for us to kind of expand the idea of giving kids knowledge about mental health before they get to CBT in a way where it's fun and engaging so that they can learn something that hopefully can help them going forward.
That is really great because then you're working really on prevention because you're getting them before, they start to develop, significant anxiety or depression or experience a great deal of stress. You're actually helping them to develop coping skills and to develop healthy behaviors that may actually buffer against some of the stress that can lead to anxiety and depression.
Yeah, and I think Shannon and I both being athletes and playing sports when we were younger, working with the kids that we're seeing individually, a lot of the issues that they were facing of like motivation, social skills, goal setting, all of that anger, emotional regulation. I was thinking, well, how did I kind of overcome that? And I was thinking, well, I learned a lot of that just being on, a sports team playing soccer, and I couldn't have a tantrum or I couldn't say, no, I don't want to do that because I had a whole team that was relying on me. So Shannon and I both realized that really set the tone for important life skills, not just coping skills, but life skills that all kids really need and sometimes struggle with in this day and age. So we thought that's the best and most fun and engaging way to get kids to realize these skills and actually apply them in the moment.
Right. And then through doing that, you're again preserving mental health, and you emphasize, brain development and that mind-body connection. And then you integrate the team sports concept. So can you talk a little bit about what that looks like in the work that you do? Because I'd love to hear about your program, Learn and Burn, and whenever you're ready to jump in, because I just think it's just such a great idea. And it would be helpful to so many kids. And I'm thinking about this past year, recording this, at the tail end, in this country anyway, or this city anyway, in terms of the pandemic, because it's different across the world. But, you talk about the need to move and that collaboration between peers and how beneficial that is. But of course, we've spent the last year isolated, and a lot of kids didn't have PE. And it seems like the work that you do is more important than ever, given the year that we've had.
Yeah, Matt, we were just talking with a researcher who studies the physical activity and the benefits on executive functioning, academic performance, and things like that. And he was saying it's just about movement. It doesn't have to be like, running a mile every day. It's just even walking up the stairs versus taking an elevator or whatever it is. And so the pandemic has forced us to be very creative in the way that we incorporate movement in our sessions. And a few things that we had to do was, just going on a mindful walk. And obviously they're walking on their street, I'm walking on mine, and we're on the phone and we're just talking that way. And that really helped to reduce like the intimidation of just talking face to face. And they would start opening up a lot more. We've done scavenger hunts, just anything to get them excited to just move. And so we've kind of had to create little activities virtually, which has been difficult, but it seemed to be helpful for them of just getting out of the chair and not staring at the screen all the time.
Absolutely. So they're moving while you're doing therapy with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely been how we've pivoted. So right before the pandemic kind of hit, we had developed a curriculum that we made designed to be in a school setting so that it could be something that's almost like a class. Like in addition to the traditional kind of PE class that's designed to really focus on the physical activity, the program that we had designed is focused on teaching kids kind of the introductory CBT style skills of basically just emotions 101. So your thoughts connect to your feelings connect to your actions. And then how can you manipulate those things to feel better, to do better, to have more friends, to be better in school? And then have the veil of, while you're learning this, you're also simultaneously getting this idea of a team sports concept where there is this like competitive edge and being able to manage that using the skills that we're actually teaching them with our words. And so that curriculum that we designed is something that we weren't able to use because nobody could be in a team anywhere. And so what we have done is kind of pivoted, and a lot of our individual clients that we're seeing, we're utilizing some of the same principles about teaching these skills with the hopes that once now that thankfully the pandemic is starting to kind of settle a little bit, and it looks like kids will be potentially back in school by the fall, that we'll be able to actually, test this curriculum and make sure that it works for a team environment as well. But we are seeing amazing things with our individual clients, and the fact that just even getting them to move throughout the pandemic was something that I think we didn't even realize that was going to be so important, but it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And can you talk a little bit about, because you talked about helping them develop skills. Can you talk about, like, for our listeners who are listening and thinking, well, what kinds of skills would my teenager or my child develop through the kind of work that you do? Can you talk a little bit about kind of what those skills are and how they could be helpful?
Yeah, we were talking about, the curriculum that we initially developed for the school. The first step of it is just sort of like mind, body awareness. So we would, incorporate physical fitness with that, like running across the gym if we were at the school or the field, and coming back and feeling your heart rate and connecting that to different emotions like anxiety or anger. So just starting with like the basic awareness of what is my body actually doing and how is it responding to different emotions, and connecting that to the physical responses of that. So starting with awareness, and then we moved more into, okay, how can we incorporate physical games like basic capture the flags or PE type games, but incorporating coping skills like how can you change your thought in those moments? So you would change like capture a flag, and then you'd have to change your negative thought to a positive one. So things like that, just adapting basic kind of physical activity, PE type activities and games, but having a coping skill flair to it of how they can be aware of their thoughts, feelings, and actions.
And we have there's 5 different kind of categories of how we conceptualize all of the skills. And so the first one is self-awareness, which is what Jesi was just talking about, right? Like being aware of your own emotions, the emotions that you're feeling, or, kind of the confidence that you have and all of those things. Then social awareness, being able to be aware of other people and how they're feeling as a result of what you know about yourself. And then self-management. So kind of what Jesi was talking about. So being able to notice that you're having a feeling and then be able to manage it or fix it. And then relationship skills. So being able to kind of connect with others, even, having these social awareness is important, but then being able to facilitate connecting and doing something about that relationship is important. And then kind of responsible decision making. So being able to, after you know all of these things, make a choice that's probably the best for you and the people around you.
Right. And those are life skills. When you think about, managing your emotions and developing and maintaining those relationships, those are key aspects of life and your daily experiences.
And that was kind of, I think, our goal going forward when we kind of transitioned out of the one-on-one therapy model. We had always, we love doing individual therapy, I think, but what we were finding, at least, and what our conversations have led to, was that we were sitting one-on-one with a kid for 45 minutes to an hour, and it was feeling like they were making strides, but then, there's with individual therapy, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, especially with kids. And it felt like we weren't reaching the amount of people that we wanted to reach to be able to teach something that could be general life skills going forward. And so that was kind of how we conceptualized this program, is that it's almost not a therapy program. It's more of a life hack kind of program that we're teaching kids, like the playbook of life sort of, and how to learn the fundamental stuff that people don't talk about. You're just supposed to learn that from your parents, right? Or you're supposed to learn that from the modeling of teachers and, these adults. But if somebody actually teaches it to you and says, like, this is important because it's going to help you have healthy relationships. It's going to have you have good self-confidence. It's going to teach you fundamental things about the way your body works that I'm teaching adults now when I'm in therapy. I'm explaining to them that this is how your body works. And they're like, what? So it's just, there's obviously like a lack in our education for children about this one part of us that's so important.
Absolutely. And it just seems that once they're more aware of, again, their thoughts and their body, like you've described, then when something is awry or they're having thoughts that they wouldn't normally have, or their heart is racing more than it normally would, and that could indicate anxiety, then you've also given them the coping skills to address some of those feelings, whether that be targeting the thoughts or engaging in some breathing or some mindful walking that would address some of the things that they're experiencing.
Yeah,
absolutely.
In a perfect world, everyone, including teachers, the parents, aunties and uncles, would know all of these skills so that when they see a kid struggling with it in the moment, they could prompt and help them with those skills. And so our goal has always been to teach not just the children, but everyone who's connected to the children these skills as well, because it's not fair for us to, like Shannon was saying, sit on a couch across from them for 45 minutes to an hour and kind of lecture them or teach them this lesson on coping skills and then expect them to later on apply it right away. I mean, that's just, their brain doesn't develop in that way. And so we wanted to figure out how we could best kind of implement these changes. And we thought the best was in the moment as they're actually doing something. And why not make it fun and creative with physical activity? But yeah, the goal would be that everyone, and adults included, would know these skills so that they could see, okay, so-and-so is having a hard time right now. I recognize that maybe he needs to stop and take a breath or do some mindfulness. And that would be the most effective change.
Right. And it seems like this is the kind of program that should be in every school.
Exactly.
I think we teach reading, writing, and math, but your emotional well-being is so important. And I would probably even say more important than those other things, because it's hard to engage in those activities when, you're experiencing stress or anxiety or sadness.
For sure. And I think I think about my own kind of journey of mental health. And I do think, like Jesi was saying earlier, that I think being on a sports team and being kind of constantly bombarded throughout my life with stress that I had to figure out how to overcome in a way that was really proactive was really helpful for me. But then, as I got older and I got into psychology and then learned these things, it was amazing to me that it was not taught to me earlier. And it is weird because, we have like a health class, like a traditional health class that talks about, mostly like menses and like these things that are like happening to these little kids' bodies, but we're not talking about like the thing that's going to be affected by the hormone changes that they're having and all of these things. And I don't understand why it's not taught in schools. It's bizarre to me that people can come out of really good structured education and not know these fundamental things about the way that their brain works. It's surprising to me.
It is surprising. And I think that this is where things need to change, and I think that having the kind of conversations that we're having and you bringing those programs to schools really helps to move the scale and move in a more proactive direction. And that really empowers, kids and the adults who support them. And there's just so much research. There's so much good research, and we've had it for a while on the benefits of physical activity for elevating mood, and for engaging in sports, for building executive functioning skills. When we see kids who are struggling with self-regulation and organization and planning and time management, sports, martial arts is probably one of the best things that they can do to develop those skills. And it all starts with, like you said, awareness of that mind-body connection and the benefits of exercise and physical activity.
Yeah, the funny thing is that now we also work with retired NFL players who know so much about their physical activity, exercise, and their body, but then they don't have the emotion piece of it, where some of them have never even talked about depression, anxiety. They didn't even know what that really meant. And so our goal is to kind of combine the two of them so that we have that whole mind-body connection.
That is so interesting. It almost seems like, when you talked about, sitting on a couch, which is kind of that traditional view of psychotherapy, it seems that when you're thinking about athletes, it would be better to kind of open up and have conversations while you're doing the sport that they enjoy. So on a basketball court, if it's a basketball player, or throwing a football or a baseball back and forth, it seems that would be a way to engage in the therapeutic process in a way that you couldn't if you were just kind of sitting on a couch across from someone. But you'd still have, you'd still be doing the same work, but just in a more engaging and maybe impactful way.
Absolutely. I think because we started as child therapists, we already kind of had a leg up on that, because I think a lot of child therapists know that you don't really get to a kid by, a 7-year-old kid by sitting them down and saying, okay, tell me about your thoughts. Like it doesn't work.
No,
because because for a lot of reasons, but because their brain is just not there. And so I think a lot of our work, another thing that Jesi and I are specialized in, is PCIT, parent-child interaction therapy. And I think we're super passionate about that program because it teaches parents to basically become the therapist for their kid through play. So modeling positive language and those kinds of things in play that can ultimately get transferred into real life. And in that, I think a lot of what Jesi and I have seen is that when kids are playing with their parents or with us, but mostly with the people that they're with all the time, there is something about that is so much more eye-opening. Parents can really see more about what the kid is thinking and processing and all of that stuff. And so, yeah, I think it translates to athletes in particular, because especially if they're pretty high performing athletes, that's what they're doing all day long. And so if you're able to kind of get them doing kind of a natural thing that they do normally, their brain is going to open up in a different way than it is when you're sitting on a couch, with a hyperactive kid who just wants to be playing basketball.
Right. And you're talking about NFL players, but I can see obviously it helping student athletes as well. But, when you're talking about kind of combining the concepts of physical activity and psychological coping skills, that's the key to emotional well-being, in terms of what the research shows us. Do you think it particularly impacts kids who have learning differences or ADHD, who struggle with executive functioning? Because that's a lot of the kids that I work with. And oftentimes there's, co-occurring anxiety and depression. And oftentimes that doesn't kind of manifest until later on. It seems like this would be a great way to kind of build up their reserve for, and build up those emotional well-being and coping skills, again, to prevent the onset of depression or anxiety that can often co-occur with learning differences, learning disorders, and ADHD.
For sure. And I think I haven't done testing in a while, but I'm in this testing networking group. And I saw someone that was talking about that they had done a psychological evaluation for a kid, or that they had read somebody's psychological evaluation and for a kid that had ADHD. And they said they had recommended occupational therapy. And this person was like surprised by that. And my first thought was, of course, It makes total sense to me why that would be a recommendation, because, if a kid is struggling with ADHD, they're going to be struggling with body regulation. They're going to be struggling with potentially sensory issues that are connected to all of those things. And like when you break it down, OT really is like movement and emotional regulation, right? And like sensory regulation. And so yeah, I think there's a lot of concepts that I think are so important. And this is kind of why we have stepped away from, we are going to provide therapy, this like evidence-based kind of treatment program for children, to being more holistic and kind of being able to tap into resources that we have. We have a really amazing occupational therapist that we're working with our NFL players that I think we're hoping to have work with us with the kids stuff too, to be able to like get that body connection for kids that have kind of more ADHD things. But the research also shows that like just moving in a way, it can decrease obviously like stress or whatever, but it sharpens your thinking. We were talking to someone who kind of specializes in the research in this area of the physical activity, emotional learning, but also just learning in general. And they were talking about how cognitive flexibility can improve after one physical movement kind of span of time. Yes. So just 30 minutes on a treadmill or whatever, or even just 30 minutes of whatever can significantly improve cognitive flexibility, which is what kids with ADHD need. So it's, I think it's so important.
It's very important. I think that's in like all my recommendations when kids, have ADHD, particularly those, with inattention and also the hyperactivity, impulsivity, when they think about, well, they're moving too much. No, they still need to move. They still need to have that exercise and get those endorphins released, and all of that needs to happen. And we just know, like you're saying, it improves flexibility. It improves the ability to focus. It doesn't take a lot of time. It can be 15 minutes before they sit down to do their homework. And the benefits are significant in terms of cognitive functioning. And also, again, your mood, it elevates mood.
Yeah. And it's also a preferred activity, just playing, running around, like kids humans just naturally, get joy from that. And
right.
So why not use that as a way to connect and get an in with them while teaching them these skills? Because sitting down, talking to someone is not a preferred activity for most of the kids. So why not make it preferred and help them with these skills?
And that is so important, because with ADHD, one of the misconceptions is that the misunderstanding about ADHD is, well, if they have ADHD, why can't they do these things? And then other things they can pay attention for a long time. And we often talk about the fact that it's the non-preferred tasks that are a struggle. So again, making those non-preferred tasks preferred is really important.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I think is really interesting that I just read in some research that I think a lot of people get weary about wanting kids to be able to move and do these things is they're thinking that if schools, for example, have physical activity breaks built into their schedule, I think a lot of people assume that they're not going to perform as well on tests, or they're not going to be able, because they aren't having that time for studying. But the research is showing it's exactly the opposite, that the more time that they spend moving their bodies, the better they're going to retain the knowledge and whatever it is that they need to perform better on tests. And so, the research is showing that it not only does it not deter test scores, it actually could improve it. And so it's so important to change this perception that kids need to be sitting at a desk all day, because it's not working for most kids. It just, that's why we all have jobs, right? It's because it's not working.
Absolutely. And like you said, it actually enhances the work that you're trying to get them to do when you have this movement built in to their day.
Yeah, and I think the research also shows that the timing of it is important as well. Having the physical activity before like a difficult subject actually helps improve their attention on the subject and the memory of it and their performance, versus if they did exercise after the difficult subject. So that's also something to keep in mind as well. If, your kid is going to start homework that is math and they just don't grasp math as well as social studies, then have them do a physical activity before so that they get all that energy out and their mind is sort of primed to learn.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm thinking about where we are right now in kind of the state of the world. We talked about being post-pandemic, at least here, because I know, my family's in Canada and they're on another shutdown right now in Ontario, Canada. And we know what's happening in India and other parts of the world. And so, but for here and hopefully in other places, this will be the case as well, where children will be preparing to transition back to normal life. What are some things that you would recommend to families as they prepare for that transition? Things are starting to open up and, they want to return to, I put normal in quotes because I think it's going to be a while before it looks pre-pandemic. But what are some things that you are recommending for families? Because there's still a lot of anxiety about just returning to normal life and what that looks like. And what are some things that you are talking to families about?
I think you're right that there is this hesitancy to kind of just jump right back in. I have some clients that it's like, well, we're back in soccer and this is it, but that isn't the norm, right? So something that I'm doing, and I'd love to hear what Jesi thinks too, but I have, and this is something that I started doing in the pandemic that I think is important kind of coming out of it, is having families come together to start doing their own version of a physical activity, kind of connection building, relationship enhancement activity that becomes just a part of their day, their schedule. And I think, for some it was walking because, during the pandemic, if you were in an apartment and you don't have an outdoor space, it was a little bit harder to be like, well, just go run outside somewhere, So it was more like, some of my families now do walks every day together. And then it's this moment of doing a mindful walk together or whatever. But as things kind of open up, I've been encouraging the idea of, okay, parks are pretty safe. You're, as long as you're wearing a mask and not staying around, getting too close to other people. So maybe incorporating more of an active physical activity with your family so that it's also a bonding experience, but it's still obviously keeping as safe as people want to be and need to be, but being able to incorporate the idea of physical activity into the day-to-day and also into family activities, because I think a lot of us get stuck in we watch TV together or, we do this or that. And it got more difficult during the pandemic because there wasn't a lot of room for physical activity. And so trying to say, okay, well, what do we as a family like doing together? Is it that we like to go kick a soccer ball around? Is it that we like to really play baseball? It's what do you guys like to do? And then trying to find a way to have a weekly activity that they're doing together that is fun, but also, getting them moving.
That's great.
Yeah. And I would say, I think patience, it's going to be a transition, but we forget how resilient and adaptable kids really are. And there might be a little bit of kind of the bumps in the road in the beginning. But I think once they get back into the groove of things, they're easily adaptable. And I know some parents, I hear them talk about, their kid forgot how to socialize. And that's just normal because you've been locked up in a house for, the last year and a half. So that's to be expected. And just kind of managing expectations and not jumping to conclusions right away, because kids, adapted to quarantine and they will adapt when they come out of quarantine as well.
And that's just it, that they are having to adapt again. I talked about resilience on this podcast a couple episodes ago, but they've adapted to the pandemic and now they're having to transition again and make some changes. But, those things that you talked about, Shannon, about kind of the walking with the family and doing those things together. A lot of families have taken this time and have bonded and have, strengthened their relationship because of bike riding together, because they can't be, have their kids in sports and they're hiking and they're walking. And I hope that continues after the pandemic ends. That even after the kids go back to soccer or go back to basketball or gymnastics, that families will still spend that time, outdoors, hopefully when the weather is nice, but engaging in some kind of physical activity together, not only for the benefits of that physical activity, but again, like you're saying, for a great bonding experience.
And I think a major thing that's so important that I hope people are learning from the pandemic in general is that a major risk factor for coronavirus, but also for everything is, attributed to not moving your body. And so also nutrition and all of those things, but obesity and, all of the things that come with that are a major factor and risk factor for developing these more serious health conditions. And it's not something that the CDC is really talking about, but it's something that is so important because, if people are moving their bodies and generally healthy, they're less likely to contract a lot of these things that everybody's worried about. And so that's also this other factor of this that's so important and was something that, I was retraining a lot of families to just become more active because of the fact that it would help them, potentially ward off the possibility of them getting COVID. And, obviously you can still get COVID, but it's more about like, just when you set yourself up for being active and moving your body, you're more likely to have a better immune system and you're going to be able to do these things that you want to do. And so that's another element that I think is really important.
It's absolutely important because, like you're saying, there are physical and mental health benefits to being physically active.
Absolutely.
Well, I cannot thank you both enough for being on the podcast. This was such great information. And I think it's going to spark conversation about the importance of physical activity. When we're thinking about our mental health, we think about it again in terms of our physical health, but it's really an important aspect of our mental health and enhancing our emotional well-being. So thank you both for being here. It was such a pleasure. I love this conversation and I can't wait to have you both again so we can have a follow-up where we won't be even mentioning the pandemic anymore.
Yeah, let's hope. Thanks so much for having us.
You can learn more about Dr. Shannon McHugh and Dr. Jesi Sasaki on their website, learnandburnkids.com. You can also email them directly at learnandburnpsych@gmail.com. All the information will be in the show notes. Both Dr. Shannon McHugh and Dr. Jesi Sasaki are two of our amazing Child Nexus professionals. We are thrilled to have them in our community. And if you want to get update information about all the great work that we are doing, please sign up at childnexus.com. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.